Get everybody, it's Ran here, Thunder Down Under. Episode 2, a bit of a break from what we were going to do, a bit of a change. So I had a few people message me about the Honda Prelude that I mentioned in episode 1. So the Honda Prelude is an interesting story for me, and I want to put the most positive spin on it as I possibly can. So I wanted to get a space frame car because that's what sports sedans are to me. I know that floor pan cars, which I currently race, are sports sedans too, but a full space frame car is where it's at for sports sedans. So the Honda Prelude was built by a guy in Melbourne called Derek Van Zelm, who's an engineer, and it ran really quite successfully. I do believe he won a championship, and then it was sold on to a guy called Dean Cam, who everyone in sports sedans would know, Big Dean Cam, and he won a couple of championships, I think, in it. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But anyway, the car had quite a pedigree. It had then been sold on to another gentleman in Rice, and look, it needed a refresh. It was reasonably cheap in the grand scheme of things when we purchased it, and I suppose the condition reflected that. So nothing against any of the previous owners. It was a car that was from the late 80s, and it had maintenance over the way, but it needed updates. Now, I was a bit naive. I'm going to take responsibility for that. I thought, hey, I'll buy a space frame car, get out, do a few things to it, and get out and race it. Simple as that. How hard could it be? It's just a car that's built with a roll cage. That's the whole car. Space frame kind of thing. Look it up if you don't know what that is. I'm not explaining it well. Anyway, I had some work done on it and went out and tested it, and it broke a front axle. So these axles go through for a center lock type of front wheel, and that broke. So then it went to get more work done. This car was built by an engineer. Derek's an engineer. I'm not an engineer. I draw pictures for a living. I visualize. I can create. I do mechanics. I'm not a mechanic, but I'm certainly not an engineer. I don't use mathematics, even though I'm quite good at mathematics, but not in an engineering sense. I don't use lathes and things like that. This car was built and conceived by an engineer. We did a bunch of work on it, upgraded a hell of a lot of things, rebuilt a lot of the car. Don't get me wrong, we spent, and Derek spent a lot of time upgrading this car. Took it out for a second test, and a front wishbone cracked, failed, and sent me off the track. Now this really this was over a 2 or 3 year period. Hadn't raced in this time very much. I'd raced one of my dad's cars a bit here and there, but I was, as my mate says, I was like a puppy, and you had my ball, and I wanted to fucking play with my ball, and my ball kept breaking, and I couldn't play with it, and I was getting pretty frustrated with the whole situation. And over this time, thankfully, I learned a lot about this car. I ended up putting a lot of it back together after things had been repaired, and I sort of thought it got to a point where it was starting to actually come together as a decent car. And at that time, I decided to sell it. I felt that engine-wise and just the package of this car was beyond my financial abilities and beyond my engineering capabilities, which we have already talked about and are very low. So the car was sold to Queensland to a good mate of mine, Tim, and he has been continuing to develop that car and finding more things. Basically, by the time you see this car in 2023, it will have been, besides the chassis, completely rebuilt, some of it redesigned, and I friggin' am so cheering for Tim to do well in it. So that's the short story about the Honda. So the Honda Prelude is a 6-litre 18-degree Chev-powered Prelude. There's not much Prelude. The roof, it's an old school sports sedan, so the roof, A and B pillars, steel, and a little bit of the quarters, not much, just a tiny little bit, and the tail lights. Everything else from memory is fiberglass and fabricated. It's got a 9-inch, an independent 9-inch rear end, Hollinger HS6, so a H pattern that's been converted into a sequential. It's dry sumped, obviously, around about the 750 horsepower mark. It's a friggin' cool car. Yeah, so Honda Prelude, check it out this year, or in 2023 at least. If you're watching this in 2022, I don't think you will, I don't know. So check it out in 23 in the National Sports Sedans. It's orange now, super cool car. Yeah, Honda Prelude, Thunder Down Under.